Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. My pleasure to be with you as always. And today I am with Patty Block. She's the founder and president of the Block Group. And like with all Fireside Chats, we're exploring the human side of business. How do CEOs and business owners who care not just about building not just about a profitable business, but a meaningful business, how do they do it? How is their journey like, and what can we learn from their experience? Patty, such a pleasure to be with you. Would love to hear the basics of your story and the wonderful work that you do in the world.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me. One of the things that I have realized over the years, I work with women business owners who are experts in their fields, and it makes me think a lot about what we as women are facing in terms of the challenges. So I help women grow and scale their companies, but I do that in an unusual way because I believe that pricing is the linchpin for everything else. So when I was growing up, my mom used to make these fabulous cookies. The whole house smelled good. It was warm. Cookies were gooey. I mean, you can almost imagine it, right? You can kind of smell it. My whole life, I watched my mom eat the broken cookies. But it wasn't until I was a teenager that I even thought to ask her, why do you only eat the broken cookies? Do they taste better? And she laughed and said, no, I eat the broken cookies so you can have the whole ones. And several years ago, I saw this really startling statistic. 62% of women rely on their business for their primary income. And 88% of those businesses make less than $100,000 a year. And to me, that seemed incredible, that in many ways, women's businesses are artificially small, maybe because we're trying to use the old corporate model that was developed 150 years ago, never worked for women, and it certainly doesn't work for us today. So that became my mission, was helping women generate more revenue with less stress, and to start with pricing based on the value of your expertise and your experience.
Yeah, so often we were talking a little bit before we hit record about how one's sort of internal sense of self is reflected in externally and how the pricing structure works. Curious if you could speak to that a little bit more, and why is it, if you could give us just a little bit more about why it is that women-owned businesses are not charging what they're worth so often.
It's an interesting conundrum because many of us, especially in Western culture, we're not raised to be breadwinners. So in my family, I have two brothers and a sister. My brothers were raised to be breadwinners, and in fact, they had a lot of pressure put on them. My sister and I were viewed differently. We were raised differently, and we were expected to get our education, get married, have children, raise our families, which I did. I did all those things, and I have 3 young adult children. What I didn't plan for was a surprise divorce when my youngest was 2 years old. So I quickly became a single mom who was on my own with no financial or logistical support. So that changed my path in, ironically, in some very positive ways. But I think there's just such a different expectation for girls and women as we're growing up. And I'm going to highlight something you said a moment ago about charging what you're worth. And my belief is it's not. Effective pricing is really not about what you're worth. It's about building value in the mind of your ideal buyer. And so that's a very different take on that concept. It's not just about raising your prices. It's about understanding what your buyers value and pricing accordingly. And that's really what I teach.
So how do we find out what our buyers really value?
Starts with market research and talking to your clients and your prospects and asking very strategic questions to understand what they want. And again, I'm going to make a really important distinction here. It's not what they need, because most people don't know what they need, but they do know what they want. So if I am looking for a marketing expert, I will go to that person and I'll say, I don't want you to teach me. Please don't teach me anything new. I want you to do this for me. And I want it to be seamless and effective and cost effective. Here's all the things I want. But I have no idea what I need. Do I need a funnel? Do I need SEO? Do I need, right? So because of that, I need someone who understands what I want. And then they can help me later, once I become a client, decide what is needed and what the priorities are.
Often I find with expert businesses, there's such a unconscious move towards articulating what people need as opposed to what they want, because experts know a great deal. They may be right much of the time about what someone needs, but what they need and what they want are so different. And sometimes the simplicity of focusing on what someone wants as opposed to what they need is hard for an expert or thought leader.
It is, and I see that all the time. I'm guilty of it, and I see that with my clients and colleagues. We all struggle because we've put years into building our careers and our businesses, and we feel like we have the answers. So it's very difficult. I agree with you.
Yeah, it's a humbling experience. I've had it many times too. And there's something I find also humbling about the right kind of market research conversation to unlock the key to what someone wants. There's a lot of pressure and psychological charge around sales conversations. Those of us in service businesses have felt this, right? But there's an even sometimes more powerful, I find, charge and weight to the right kind of market research conversation in which you're going really deep with someone, really vulnerably, to get them in closer touch with what they want. And I can find some of those conversations where you really get the truth from people to be very challenging, but so beautiful, right? Have you had these experiences?
I have. I've had those experiences, and I always feel so honored
Yes.
when, right? Because the person that I'm speaking with is being vulnerable, they're being honest. And for women, there's this, regardless of gender, there's a difference between knowing what you want and getting what you want. And for women, a lot of times we don't even know what we want. We know what we don't want,
Mm-hmm.
but it's hard for us to articulate. And so that's often what I'm doing in my market research is I'm trying to elicit what is it you want and you don't want. We'll worry about how you get that later. But let's focus on what is that? Because for a lot of women, it's not clear. And part of that goes back to what I call the broken cookie effect
Yeah.
of always putting others first
Yes.
and worrying about the needs of others and not really understanding what we need.
Yes, yes. It can be so when there are others around us who may not be having the best experience, it can be so, on the one hand, really powerful to help them, right? And it's a wonderful impulse to want to do good in the world. But there can be this way of totally losing touch with yourself, of disconnecting with your body, your soul, your spirit. And sometimes helping others is a way to avoid asking those really challenging questions about who you are.
That is so true. I think that's very true for me, that I'm much more comfortable asking the questions than
Yes.
answering the questions.
Yes, yes. And I think in this whole universe, it's really interesting in this whole universe of consultants and coaches, people who do really good, often other focused work. We can't see the back of our own heads. And I think those of us in these sorts of industries need to work with versions of ourselves very, very often. If we can't see the back of our own hair and we're constantly looking after others, looking for ways to help others, then there's a real danger, right? That we may lose track of ourselves. And it's so much easier often to help others than to help ourselves. One of our coaches puts it wonderfully. She says, most people just can't see the back of their own hair.
Yeah. The phrase that I have heard that I really like is, it's really hard to see the label when you're inside the jar,
Yeah.
right? It's the same concept of perspective. How do you gain perspective? How do you think about things differently yes, we all think we're right. We think we're, especially given our education and experience, we think we have some answers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be positioning ourselves as experts.
Yes.
So, but then it's hard because you're inside the jar and you believe what you believe. So it is a challenge, and that's something my clients share with me as well, is having that perspective and thinking of other approaches that they may not have thought of.
So, as a woman business owner contemplates working with you, or what the experience of working with you would be like, I'm curious, what should lead them to raise their hand to self-identify? Ooh, maybe I should explore working with Patty. What are the characteristics they should have?
There are several. If your business has plateaued, if you have done very well, but now you're wondering where your next client is coming from, or if this conversation resonates with you, that you wonder if you're leaving money on the table, you haven't raised your prices, maybe ever. And where a lot of us are really tied to the hourly billing model. And a lot of my clients come out of corporate. They're accountants and attorneys and specialty consultants. Because of that, that hourly model has been drilled into our heads. And we have this false sense of security that will be compensated for all our time. If we just bill hourly, that will cover us. And my belief is, unless you are charging an extraordinarily high hourly rate, it's a false sense of security. And it also is very transactional.
Yes.
So that causes a whole set of problems. So communicating that value and pricing based on value is a reason that my clients come to me, because they know they could be doing better. And they know that they have a sense of what happens when you start bringing in more revenue. There's an element of feeling embarrassed if not bringing in, or the way people think of it is, we're not as successful as we think we should be. But the way I think of it is, if you're not bringing in enough revenue to meet your goals, then there's something really missing. And the challenge here is that they don't know what to do about it. So we don't know how to switch from an hourly model if that's all we know. And that is, it's a frustration and sometimes an embarrassment. So that is often why people will come to me, is they want to fix their pricing. They want to approach their business differently. What I often say is, your business doesn't have to be a burden. It can be very joyful, but there are certain elements that you need to put into place in order to make that happen.
The business can be joyful. Yeah, I think for a very high percentage of founders, it is not. So much of that resonated. I didn't tell you this. In a previous life, I was an attorney, and I built 3 companies. The first failed. The second I grew and sold. But part of the transition from the first to the second of doing business better was switching from hourly to value-based pricing, and so resonate with so much of what you said there. As an attorney, you find yourself so frequently in positions where someone stomachs you. They don't really want to hire you, but they hire you. And so if they can make that experience less costly, they're going to find a way to do it. What an easy way hourly pricing is for them to cut corners, right? It's an incentive for clients to cut corners, and often it's an incentive for consultants sometimes to inflate the amount of time it takes to do something, right? So very often the hourly model creates really challenging incentives for both parties.
It does. I'll give you an example. My client Jenny had talked about, she's an outsourced CMO, and she had done an entire marketing plan for a client, and it only took her a couple hours. So she was paid less than $1,000 for an entire marketing plan that changed the course of this business.
Yeah.
And that was the point at which she came to me and said, I have to figure out how to do this differently because they want to compensate me for my time, not my expertise.
Or the impact ultimately that your expertise has, right?
Exactly.
It's like we send this sort of spiritual signal to the universe when something that takes an hour, we can charge 20,000 for it. If the impact, right, is $20,000 or more. And we send this signal to the universe of, well, the impact of this isn't really that big. And so there's always the incentive for the client to not leverage the work as much as they might otherwise. Pricing is through a macro economy, but also through a small business. It's such a powerful signal.
I am so glad you mentioned that because that's something I talk about frequently is you can actually drive value with your pricing. Exactly what you just described. I use a retail model and I say you can look at it as a Walmart, a Macy's, or a Neiman Marcus. And you know going into those stores what to expect, the quality, the cost. I personally don't shop in a store like Neiman Marcus because I don't care that much. So to spend that much money on designer clothes is not important to me. But to many people, it's very important. And so that's what determines. And the way those retail stores price, you can relate it to your own company. You can say, am I serving customers of Walmart, Macy's, or Neiman Marcus? Most of my clients work with Macy's or Neiman Marcus clients. And so again, when you are pricing in a way that conveys that value, your clients, your prospects will understand that better. And they really do equate, I think we as humans equate low quality and low price and high quality and high price. So I'm really glad you brought that up because it's an important aspect of pricing.
Yes. And there's a way, if you want to look at it in sort of a scientific sense, serotonin is this transmitter of, in many ways, sort of our self-belief, our sort of sense of who we are and where we are. And when we charge more, our neurotransmitters fire in a very different way. We just show up differently. Our sense of presence is different than it otherwise would be. And so much of communication is nonverbal. So other people will feel the truth of you showing up differently.
That's a great point. It's a great point. And it's also tied into building your confidence. And that's something I focus a lot on. So the women I work with are super confident and feel very competent when they're providing their services. But they feel less competent about pricing and about selling. And so those are two big pieces that I teach. I have a program called Value-Driven Pricing and another called Painless Selling to Ideal Buyers. And that's the whole concept there. And those two pieces fit together like a puzzle. But as I often tell my clients, it doesn't matter how well you sell if you haven't fixed your pricing first.
So for a woman business owner that has made some pricing changes, I'm curious to learn more about how you would help them with this confidence piece. Totally agree with you. Really curious, and I think the audience is as well, to learn a little bit more about the how.
Sure. So there's a lot of psychology, which is true of every aspect of our business, how we manage people, how we bring in our clients, how we manage our clients. All of that, you have to think about the psychological background. And so building your confidence comes from several different places. For my clients, because they are technical experts, having a framework and a calculation for their pricing gives them a lot of confidence. Right? We're math nerds. I am, my clients are. And so having that calculation is one of the things that I teach. So it's about structure. And sometimes I don't recommend you raise your prices. Sometimes the dollar amount may be appropriate, but the structure is not right, or it's not resonating with your prospects. So it's really about simplicity and structure and building a model. So that's the first thing we do, which is kind of an academic exercise. But the other thing that we do is talk about their relationship with money. And for women, there are things that might surprise you. So sometimes they surprise me. There are women who talk about, and again, are very vulnerable when they're talking about the fact that how they grew up, they learned nothing about money. They didn't learn how to manage money or invest money. It's very pervasive. And again, that goes back to those expectations of our families. We weren't expected to be breadwinners. We weren't expected to have discretionary funds that we could invest. So we were never taught to do that. Many of us have taken it upon ourselves as adults to learn that and hopefully to raise our children differently. But that's a big piece of the psychology that I work around is some women are actually afraid to be successful. Some are very nervous about bringing in more money. And as part of my market research, I asked the question, if you had an extra $100,000 in your business, what would you do with it? And the answers were fascinating. They would hire more people. They would give raises. They would have a company retreat. And all of that is lovely, except I'm wondering, what happened to mama?
Yeah.
Right? So I would ask them, would you take more money out of your company? Would you pay yourself more? What would you do for yourself? And they're across the board. The answers were, they would put everyone else first and take care of everyone else, and then think about what was important to them. And so I helped them flip that model. And what I learned from being a single parent, frankly, any kind of parent, is that unless I'm in good shape, mentally, physically, emotionally, it is very difficult for my kids to be healthy and productive. So that, right? And so we as parents, we learn that, but we don't always apply it. And sometimes we don't apply it in our businesses. So that's part of what I teach is you are going to have to take care of yourself first, and I'm going to help you understand what that means for you. And then we're going to build this structure, and then we're going to talk about your relationship with money and how you can shift your mindset.
Yeah. Put your own oxygen mask on first, right?
Very true.
And there can be such, just to admit, oh, I could pay myself more, like there's such a shame around that, right?
Right. Like you're being greedy. And people, especially women, feel so guilty about that. And that really works against us. You know, it's as if there's a glass ceiling in our business, and there isn't. But we still sometimes behave that way.
Yes.
So changing that whole mindset, I think, is a critical piece.
Society and the way that we're raised, as you're pointing out, is one builder of that glass ceiling, but we then become builders as well of it, right? There's all kinds of different forces that come together. And as you grow, as you learn, you can shatter that ceiling.
Yes, absolutely. And how you feel once you do that is so fantastic. And earlier you were talking about the return on investment and that how quickly that happened in your previous company. And that's what my clients find. The return on investment is almost immediate.
Yeah.
And it really takes longer to build that confidence and to have a sales process and to understand how you can guide your buyers. So that process takes longer, but building your pricing model, you can do pretty quickly and learn to communicate effectively around that.
Love it, love it, love it. As we come towards the end of our time together, Patty, I think this has been a fascinating conversation about the wonderful work you do. We love to usually end these conversations on a human note by asking, what do you like to do when you're not doing this important work for women business owners? What do you do for fun?
Well, I love to read. I listen to so many podcasts, I'm embarrassed to tell you. So because I'm an introvert and I'm a very quiet person, a lot of what I do is I'm processing information in those quiet times. So I go out for walks. I listen to podcasts. I read books. I love historical fiction. I love history in general. So for me, those re-energize me. And then of course, spending time with my family, and all of my kids are grown now and all have their own businesses and participate in my business and help me with mine. So it's almost like I raise my own workforce. But I also help my kids by advising them. I'm their business advisor, and I can help them every step of the way. So spending time with family and reading historical fiction, those are probably my two favorite things.
Fantastic. We'll have to talk historical fiction. Such a pleasure, Patty, to be with you today, to learn from you. I think this message is so, so important. So an absolute honor to send it out into the world and hope that there are ripple effects from it. And it's been just such a pleasure being with you today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a great conversation.